Welcome to another episode of the Bootleg University Podcast, which we are still calling a podcast, despite the fact that you are obviously watching a video on YouTube. Yes. We're going to be changing up the format here for our next couple of videos. We've invited our lead VFX artist, Graham Hughes,
Hello,
to join us and discuss some of the VFX sequences from the Guardians of Justice, and to give you some insight into how he works, how he constructs sequences, and to help those of you out there who might be thinking about making your own short films or movies, how you can replicate some of the work that Graham's been doing. So you actually had kind of an interesting segue into VFX that started with your parkour career.
Yeah, I think I said I came to VFX via parkour and magic, which is an esoteric and not entirely helpful description. But
you were like on the vanguard of the parkour scene back, 10 years ago?
Yeah, in the U.S. at least. Yeah, well, let's take it back. It was the year 2007.
District B13 had just come out.
Oh gosh. Yeah, no, okay, so I was in college. Okay, first of all, my roommate in college was a magician. And so like we would go around campus and he'd do like his street magic, close-up magic performance thing for the girls on campus, as you do.
And that worked?
He made it work. Do anything with enough confidence.
Okay.
But yeah, so I was a digital media major, which at this college at that particular time was sort of like a catch-all. Like it was just comprised of loose parts from other majors. So it was like a little bit of film, a little bit of fine art, some like editing, some sound design, some programming. It's just like they could have marketed it as how to be a one-man army filmmaker, because it's just like every step of the process you just get a little taste of it. But obviously I don't know if that was really like a thing at the time.
And how much of that was VFX, if any?
Hardly any. We had one class that was kind of focused on like post-production type stuff, and VFX was a slice of it, but we weren't even using After Effects. It was some like Apple program that I don't think exists anymore.
And so you pretty much self-taught in terms of the CGI aspect of it.
Yeah, in terms of like practical experience, entirely self-taught. But I did learn some like kind of, a lot of film fundamentals and a lot of different aspects of filmmaking in general.
Right. Because what we're going to get into when we watch our first clip, we're going to point out how you're moving the camera digitally, how you incorporate all these important aspects of filmmaking. You're not just plopping a CGI creature down in front of a stationary camera.
Yeah, and part of what the story I was illustrating is, a part of that too. Like, the reason I mentioned the magician is because he introduced me to parkour.
Okay.
And through YouTube and just, seeing videos of stuff, which like was like a scene from like Beautiful Mind or whatever, where your protagonist gets their key piece of inspiration and the music swells and you montage into the future. Mm-hmm. And like cut to several years later, I'm like neck deep in the parkour scene. I'm like investing in camera equipment. I'm like really learning how to edit and doing some like, After Effects. That was, one step leads to another. That was how I got my first roads into doing like actual like YouTube backyard filmmaking, which led me doing more and more complicated VFX, which led me to move to LA. And, here I am.
Okay. And how did you meet Addy originally? How does anyone meet Addy Shankar?
Yeah. He just shows up on your doorstep one day and he's like, dude, listen to this.
That's kind of literally what happened to me.
No, it was like, it was weird. I'd freshly moved to LA. Like I'd been here, I don't know, a few weeks maybe. And the dude I'm staying with takes me to lunch with a friend of his who happens to be doing some work on, at the time it was Gods and Secrets.
Now Guardians. Yeah.
And, he knows that I'm looking for work and I do VFX and stuff. So he's like, he hooks me up with a scene to do for credit, basically. Just get your name in the show and, get some work or whatever. And I was like, cool, sounds great. So I do it, and luckily, it was a flexible enough show. Like, they didn't have any really strict guidelines. They're just sort of like, yeah, we need some action stuff, and, you know, we're kind of going for, like, this really stylized vibe. So I pull, like, really heavily from, like, Scott Pilgrim and Sin City and, like, you know, kind of pull in some aesthetic elements. And they really liked what I was doing. And eventually Addy gets on the horn with me and is like, dude, we want to bring you on, you know, doing this stuff, like, full time. And the rest is history, like 6 years later.
Yeah, so most people wouldn't know this, but of all the people who were there at the end of the process with us, other than Adi Shankar, you had been on the project the longest of anybody.
Yeah.
And I think you're technically credited as lead designer.
Yeah, I'm like lead designer and VFX artist, and I think I have executive producer credit as well.
Yeah, because your work was pretty instrumental in helping Addy figure out the fundamental visual schema of the entire show.
Yeah, I think he has said that I think I was the first person who got it.
Yeah.
As far as like what was trying to be done with the show. So like that was definitely you know, a big factor, and I think helped sell Netflix on it as well.
Yes. Yeah. Because I think anybody who's watched the show knows that without the VFX, the show is nothing.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. It would be a lot of people standing in front of green screens. Mm-hmm. So let's play what I think is a lot of people's favorite moment from episode 1. You'll recognize it instantly, I think. Roll the clip.
There's a squad of cyborg T-Rexes on the loose in Syria. Take them down and bring them to justice.
It's one of the best lines in this whole show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ken, can you just back up and leave the T-Rexes on the screen? So...
Nope, hold on.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk, Ken, you and I, about how we arrived at a squad of cyborg T-Rexes on the loose in Syria.
Yeah, because I think when DDP filmed that line, it wasn't necessarily...
It was... So this whole sequence, DDP Nighthawk is briefing the team on what their new missions are going to be, and... You know, the scene was just filmed with the camera rotating around and him barking out orders. And most of those orders and missions were pretty generic, right? It's like there's a riot over here. And in this particular case, there's a new terrorist cell in Syria, take them down and bring them to justice. Unfortunately, we sort of realized that once you get to episode 3, and there's this whole conversation about should the Guardians of Justice deal with Anubis or should it be left to the U.S. government, it doesn't really make sense to have a moment in episode 1 where he's sending the Guardians of Justice to take out a terrorist cell.
Right.
So we realized we had to change the line. And in order to ADR over the line, and for anyone who doesn't know, ADR is additional dialogue recording. It's when you record new dialogue in a sound booth after the fact and then lay it over the top of the image. We needed to put a clip over whatever the new line was going to be. Now, I realized that we have to kind of set the tone for what this show is going to be moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Right. Episode 1 was like pretty straightforward and like...
Right.
Yeah.
And there's often a clear delineation between the animation and the live. Like the animation is a lot of montages or stuff like this where it's people are talking and the animation is showing what's being described. I thought we needed to create the most absurd possible thing to lead into take them down and bring them to justice, which because we had DDP actually saying the line, pumping his fist, we wanted to keep as much of that as possible. So exit out of this. And my brain went straight to click on T-Rexes.jpg. One of my favorite comic strips of all time. This one from Calvin and Hobbes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where describing the end of the Mesozoic era, a herd of chasmosaurs is unusually jittery. They now know they have much more to fear than tyrannosaurs. Now they face an even greater danger, tyrannosaurs and F-14s. And then you've got Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin saying this is so cool, and Hobbes saying this is so stupid. And I think that's kind of
That's Guardians.
That's Guardians. It's the mantra of our show. Either you think what we're doing is super cool, or you think it is the dumbest thing you have ever seen in your life. I was initially like, let's put some Tyrannosaurs in F-14s, but then I was like, you can't just rip off Calvin and Hobbes that blatantly.
Yeah.
And that's when I said, squad of Cyborg T-Rexes.
Squad of Cyborg T-Rexes, and you got the cannon on the back.
Yeah.
And it just is...
And we all sort of burst out laughing in editing.
Because it really does set the tone. Because, you know, people, as we were working on the show, the episodes were kind of all influencing and informing each other. And so as we would do this over here, like Sam was saying, in episode 3, you get to this sequence, and over here you get to that sequence. So there was definitely this kind of just like going back and forth and then ramping up and dialing up the absurdity as things went along, which is kind of in many ways the process that we had in editing the show. So what did you do? That visual effects
Well, first
shot
thing
in?
I did was just laugh my head
try and
off
bring it up.
for a minute.
Yeah, because Addie immediately calls Graham.
Yeah, we're on a conference call with the three of us. I was like, dude, could you do Cyborg T-Rexes? And I'm like, first of all, yes. Second of all, that's hilarious.
Yeah, this is cool.
Yeah,
Oh,
and this
yeah.
is another shot that Graham created, I assume, using some variation of the...
Yeah, it's the same model that I just kind of decimated, which is a process to just reduce the number of polygons in a model.
Okay, what
so
program
if you go-
did you use, first of all?
Everything in Guardians I did in Cinema 4D and After Effects.
Okay.
So I'm kind of like using some new stuff now, but like, yeah, at the time, that's what I was using.
What is the price point on Cinema 4D?
It's not cheap.
Okay.
I don't have the exact number in my head.
There's
Like,
a version that comes with After Effects, though, right?
Yeah, I think
It's
so.
fairly limited, I think, but
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty minimal.
So
I've been
maybe
starting,
not
like-
what you would recommend to the...
Right, like I'm
new
now, I've been switching over to Blender for a while now, which is like free and open source and has all kinds of support.
why? I'm not questioning Blender or anything.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
why? Because
well,
a lot of
I mean,
people
for a
make
few
the
reasons.
opposite.
Yeah, I mean that seems to be how you would intuitively do it. I started with Cinema 4D because when I was researching 3D programs, it seemed like the one that was the most user friendly, and I think it probably is. Like it just has a really kind of friendly appeal to it, where it's like it's just kind of easy to learn. But Blender is just well, it's free for one thing, so the barrier to entry is like 0, but it's also just over time, it's become much more feature complete than it used to be. Like when I was first shopping, like Blender wasn't really considered like an option, I guess, not on any professional level at least, because you're just like, yeah, it's pretty good, but it can't do everything. And now it's like it can pretty much do everything. And like there's some stuff it can do that like Cinema 4D doesn't do. That like C4D is it's kind of like After Effects in that it's really geared towards like motion graphics, less so than professional film applications, despite having cinema in the name for some reason. But Blender really is just lets you do just whatever you want basically, and you don't feel like as restricted.
Interesting.
And
cool.
the actual T-Rex model, did you purchase that from...
Yeah, it's funny. There's another image in that little thing. If you go up to the top, there's like a textures thing. This was a model I bought on CG Trader online that was like a pretty...
Which one is it?
It's at the very top.
Material
examples. Yeah, and is a pretty cheap like video game asset. It's like not very high quality, like low res textures at the bottom there. And so like I brought it in and just kind of like reworked the textures from the original one, which like looks at home in a video game,
Oh, wow.
to the bottom one, which actually is it's not like incredibly high detail, but it holds up well enough for our purposes.
But also, I mean, anyone can look at this and see how much better your
Right.
version looks
Yeah.
than the original. And then the cyborg element, the laser turrets, were those also assets
those were
you
just
purchased?
like I had some kit bash elements, which are just like just basically sets of like pieces of metal, and the classic kit bashes like the Death Star trench, where they just like put bits of battleship things,
Right.
glued them all together. But like you do the same thing in 3D. We just have like sets of sci-fi looking objects you can combine to make interesting looking things. And so that's what all the cyborg pieces on the Rex are.
And the background.
That's just temporary. That's
no. I mean in the finished.
Oh, in the finished one. Yeah. That's here. We can pull up my little breakdown thing if you want.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
So, do you want to intro this clip really quick?
Yeah. This is just going to show like kind of the scene overview of what this actually looks like in the program. Yeah, I have objects like kind of appearing and disappearing because anytime something's off camera, you don't want it eating up your RAM, so you just like make it disappear. And here's like a compositing breakdown of how the render fits into the final shot.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so go back to start over.
Play it again.
And so you've got this sort of imaginary camera that you're moving around.
Yeah. So it's kind of cool when you play it, you'll see like when the camera moves around, you can see it changing focal length as the box kind of widens.
Oh,
there.
okay.
Do we have a laser pointer? Just kidding.
It's always a process kind of finding what the camera movement is going to be in a shot, and that's kind of like one of the bigger elements of animating it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like before you can even really start to dial in the animation, you have to know at least like, well, what's the camera going to be looking at? What's the angle going to be?
And so what were you thinking about when you were picking those movements?
Right. So my mind immediately went to, this is like a news reporter on the ground in Syria as this T-Rex is attacking the village. He's trying to catch the action, and oh my God, there's a T-Rex right next to me, and then it gets laser blasted.
So can play, but pause every time the shot changes a little bit. So we start actually with like this.
I'm going to go back.
No, keep going forward.
Okay.
So we start actually
start on a whip pan.
Yeah, right, on buildings, and we whip pan over again, like you said, as if the camera has just been turned on and is trying to catch the action. So we have this movement left to right, play, and then
Contrasting.
we pull out again, as like you said, as if the reporter, the journalist, is
It's like focusing.
right, trying to get the full thing in frame.
It's so awesome.
And then there's this cloud of dust that's picked up by the laser blast. And what's really, again, I love this shot so much, and what I really love about it is that you've motivated this last camera move to the final big T-Rex that's going to kill us by the laser blast that comes from off screen and hits right next to the camera.
Right.
Now, it does two things. One, it causes the imaginary cameraman to pan towards this bigger, closer T-Rex. And two, it kicks up a cloud of dust to obscure our view just a little bit when we get the hero shot. I assume that was intentional.
Right.
Because...
Yeah, it's people talk about motivating your camera in film, and like the same's true in CG. Like the rules of cinematography don't change. The difference in CG is obviously your camera can do anything.
Yeah.
So like you can fly it around the scene like a helicopter and just like get every angle of something, but like you don't want to do that because it looks fake.
Right.
Like audiences know that cameras can't do that. So like anytime you have like one of these big sweeping camera moves that goes through impossible areas, is like it just feels CG to people,
right?
Which is like something that people complain about Marvel movies for and stuff.
Right. I think that's an accurate complaint with a lot of contemporary big budget blockbusters, because if you can show anything and everything,
right,
and you can move the camera wherever you want, you don't have to think about the rules of filmmaking except keep the action in the frame.
Right.
Whereas, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting thinking about that because James Cameron.
I was just about to bring up James Cameron.
James Cameron talks about how, especially in the third act of Avatar.
That was exactly what I was going to bring up.
We already know. We don't even need to compare notes. They're happening right here. How in the third act of Avatar, he talks about he didn't put the camera anywhere that it couldn't actually be in a sequence like that.
Right.
Like if this was a real
set. If you can put a person there holding a camera, that's an okay spot for the digital camera.
And
right.
There are so many shots in the third act of Avatar that are very similar to this, where there's a whip pan or a rack focus as the camera is following the action and trying to get the shot.
Absolutely.
And there's only like a couple shots in Avatar that I think really don't work. Like there's the one slow motion one where Jake Sully is sliding away from the first monster that attacks him.
Yeah, but it's just so cool.
It's so cool. When he
But
jumps over with the machine gun too at the end, that's so awesome. There we go.
But it's the one moment where you're like, no, the camera couldn't do this in the real location.
Yeah, I mean it extends to subtler things too, like just keeping in mind when you're working in 3D what types of tools you would have available on a set if you wanted to do like even a simpler subtle camera move. Like if I had a digital scene of this environment and I wanted to like shuttle a camera across the table to you, like I probably wouldn't do a 3D move that goes up like this because like you wouldn't really have a slider or a crane or whatever that would get you to do this move. You know, you'd probably go straight forward in a horizontal way. And like that's something I see kind of amateur, I say it's not in a derogatory way, but like people who are learning 3D stuff kind of make those mistakes is they'll just be like, okay, cool, we'll just have like this camera do this move that's not necessarily wrong, but it's just like you would never set it up that way if you were on a set. And it's just like it adds to a slight uncanny feeling.
Yeah,
it's just not quite grounded in reality, you know.
And I think if we can go off on a little bit of a James Cameron tangent in terms of classical practical effects versus CGI,
sure,
and both are great and both have their place. If you look at something like the final Alien Queen battle versus the power loader in at the end of Aliens, that is a ton of close-ups.
Yeah.
Close-ups of Sigourney Weaver's face, of a detail of the Queen's tail whipping back and forth, or just the arm, or just the mouth coming out. There are very, very few wide shots because you don't actually have a giant power loader mech and an alien queen that are both fully functional. And so you have to cut between these individual elements, and the viewer creates the experience of the scene in their own mind through the power of suggestion. You are asked as an audience member to put 2 and 2 together to make 4. When modern big budget blockbusters can just do everything in a wide, it doesn't ask anything of you as the audience. It doesn't ask you to contribute to the experience of watching the movie.
I think is also like just in the visual language of filmmaking, like I feel like a wide, in the specific example of the Queen Alien versus Mech Loader, I feel like a wide shot would have removed all the energy of that scene.
Yeah.
Like, because the whole point of that is like, you know, you're inside this little mech thing, you being Ripley, and this thing is, you know, this monster is coming right at you and you're barely fending it off. Like, you want that to be close in your face, you know?
Right.
So those close-ups are like kind of essential to the tone of it. Like, if they had cut to a wide, it would have just been like, I don't know, like just, okay.
It's despite the fact that these are two gigantic things fighting, it's an incredibly claustrophobic sequence for the
like
character.
Stabbing right at her face.
I like the explosions in the background as well.
Always explosions. That was probably the first note on any scene I submitted, Addie saying more explosions.
Yeah.
Can you just put some explosions in it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I did my Mr. Rogers short, it was the same thing. It's just like, can you add a lot more chaos?
But so if there are a couple takeaways that anybody watching this can use, it's number one, motivated camera movement, but also just camera movement in general and movement across the scene in general.
Paying attention to what your camera is doing rather than simply just trying to catch the action is like, you know, really, really critical to making CG that feels like it's not CG.
Right. And also, if you don't have $1 million to spend on a hero shot like this, cloud of dust.
Cloud of dust. There you
dust
go.
is your friend.
Get a $35 T-Rex model off of CG Trader and give it a better texture.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So cool.
Because nobody watches this shot and says, "Oh, it doesn't look totally realistic." They say it looks cool.
Yeah, it looks cool. That's, you know.
I love that he's got like a metal helmet.
yeah, and the
like
eye is like
eye.
Cyborg too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the little details, man. We notice. It's so cool. And then just blast the camera, man. That's so cool. That's awesome.
Man.
Yeah. All right. Do we want to say anything else about this sequence?
Yeah. Campaign for Guardians 2 so we can. It's all about the Cyborg T-Rex.
It's an entire just episode.
Invasion of the T-Rexes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did they come from?
All right. Thank you for watching this breakdown video on the Bootleg Universe videocast. Join us next time when we will be talking about a couple other cool shots that Graham has put together.